morning for those of you on the Pacific Coast, and for those of you in the East, good afternoon. My name is Christian Brock, and welcome to our press conference for today, where elected officials have come together to highlight the impact of the fast fashion and microplastics on the climate crisis. Today, I have with me Assembly member from New York, Félix Ortiz, from the 51st District in New York, and Assembly member and Assistant Speaker. Also have Mayor Heidi Harmon from San Luis Obispo. It's good to see you again, Harmon. And I'm excited to introduce one of the EOPA fellows and Sunrise member, Miriam Wallstrom, who has been doing a lot of work in the space of research in the space of fast fashion and microplastics. Again, my name is Christian. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Elected Officials to Protect America, a nonprofit organization that was established by current, former elected officials and military veterans to organize around the climate crisis and combating climate crisis. Today, we'll just cover a few things, as I said, of the impact of fast fashion on the climate crisis, and specifically the production of microplastics and the impact on our oceans and our water supply. First up, I'd like to introduce, again, Assembly Member and Assistant Speaker, Félix Ortiz of New York.
Thank you, Chris, and very happy to be with the Madam Mayor and Miriam for this occasion. I think this is a very important topic, especially when we are right now in the Christmas spirit of trying to and the topic is very interesting, fast fashion, and people trying to buy fast without really recognizing and reading labels, and most of these clothes sometimes is made by oil-based polyesters and synthetic fabrics. And as you probably know, I have legislation on microfabrics, where most of the time people that buy clothes, or sometimes they probably throw it on the floor, on the river, they throw it on the street, and they have no idea what they are really buying. Secondly, we have to recognize also the work that the elected official to protect America has done throughout the years on trying to bring elected officials from different spectrum throughout the country. And I think this is a very important piece on this press conference and the other that has been held by this organization, because when you have elected officials from different part of the country talking about different pieces of legislation or different work that they are doing, specifically in this area that is so close to my heart, because in 1995 I started my career really getting elected by fighting back the injustices of sweatshop and in America. And when I say in America, I'm talking about behind my backyard in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, and recognizing that while people was talking about probably Honduras, Tijuana, they was talking about China, they was talking about India, other country, child labor really was happening behind my backyard in Sunset Park on 62nd Street between 4th and 5th and 5th and 6th Avenue. And some of the clothing that was making there was done by kind of material that really was impacting and not just our environment regarding the waters and the street and others, but regarding the pollution, because some of this company they didn't care on burning some time of the extra clothes behind their backyard, what we call it patio, in their neighborhood, in our neighborhood. So this prompted me to really put a lot of pressure to stores such as Sears, such as Macy's and Liz Claiborne and others to really bring awareness about the injustices that was happening. And lastly, I did a bill where not only we was making accountable the manufacturers, but we was making accountable the manufacturer, the fashion designers, and the subcontractor. And we managed to really recuperate more than $2 million in wages owed to these individuals. And this cannot be a better day to really bring awareness about to consumers about why and how we should be have a conscience about when we buy product. Now today is a different ballgame. We're buying online because of the COVID-19 has changed the dynamic of everything that we're doing in our life and impacting our behavior right now. So it's very important that we as leaders we really continue to bring awareness about this issue that is still visible. People think that child labor disappeared already in 2021 or 2020, and let me just say this to you: child labor is still happening in a bigger rate because we are not paying attention anymore the way that we used to. We are being deviated with so many other issues impacting our local communities, such as the environment, such as social justice and other. Well, the child labor is an environmental and social justice problem. That's the way I look at it. When you have clothes making with items or chemicals that are unnecessary and unacceptable. So lastly, I would like to say that it's very important that we recognize those people who do the goodwill, and we should punish those who doesn't. And it's a great honor for me to be here with all of you.
Thank you, Assemblyman Ortiz. It's interesting point that you bring up about the impact of child labor as a environmental and social injustice issue. It's not something that often is connected with the climate crisis as we stand in the conversation itself. I know that as we spoke earlier about fast fashion and the outfits or the clothing being produced with a lot of synthetic materials, those materials, when washed, tend to share microplastics. Those microplastics then impact our water. And with that, I'd like to introduce Mayor Heidi Harmon and to kind of address, as a leader of a city on a coastal city, to kind of address the impact both of microplastics on her community and then the impact of or the stigma behind doing thrift shops or buying secondhand clothes. So Mayor Harmon, would you please kind of speak more about what your city is doing? I understand that you're receiving an award, a Small City Award for climate this year, and would you enlighten us on what your city and your leadership is doing?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me here today. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it combines two of my favorite things, climate action and fashion. So I'm grateful to be here to be speaking to this. Having been a climate activist for the last 15 plus years, I am really proud and excited of all the leadership that we have had in the city of San Luis Obispo. We have one of the most ambitious carbon neutrality goals in the United States. We've moved to community choice energy, and the award we're receiving tomorrow is for our policy on decarbonizing of the built environment. So in the future, all new residential units in the city of San Luis Obispo will be built carbon free. So all electric buildings coming soon. To a neighborhood near you here in San Luis Obispo. And, these are, then it's so exciting to be a leadership city because what you start to see then is cities following your lead. And so I would invite other electeds to really consider taking a leadership role in their community. Not only is the right thing to do for your community, but it hopefully inspires others to do the same. I do live here on the central coast of California, and our beaches are such an essential part of our quality of life here. It's an essential aspect of our local economy in terms of a driver for tourism. Also, Morro Bay, sitting right next door, is known for its fisheries. And so keeping the oceans as clean as possible is essential on so many levels here. And that includes, of course, keeping the microplastics that polyesters and other fabrics do create when they're washed and get into our water system. And so that's just one of the many reasons I'm encouraging people to thrift first before you shop in other more in other ways. And not only is thrifting, I think, the right thing to do both for the environment, also for your pocketbook, but quite frankly, as someone who has had a lifelong passion for fashion, It's the best to find really fun, interesting, unique items that you will love. There's absolutely, in my opinion, no reason to at least try, start with thrifting. And then if you can't find something in the thrift store, of course, I would encourage you to shop local quality fair trade items. Just by way of example, everything I'm wearing right now, I got secondhand. So this dress I got at a local thrift store. These earrings I did get in an online thrift store. These glasses, which are vintage Christian Dior glasses, I got at an estate sale and then had my prescription put in them. And then I'm drinking my tea out of my mug that I got at a different thrift store. And so I just would encourage people to give it a try. It's super fun. It's kind of like going on a little hunt for some fun items, and you go in looking for something you need, and you will come out with something fun that you don't have to feel guilty about, both because there's no environmental impacts at that point, and your pocketbook will still be robust on your way out the door. So I'm proud of the initiatives that we have as a city, and I very much love being a thrifter and a garage sailor too, my whole life. So I encourage people to try it out.
Thank you, Mayor Harmon. That's an interesting perspective, especially given the time of the year we're coming to this. Christmas is about 9 days away, 8 or 9 days away. COVID-19 has really pushed more people to shop online. And as a result, you're looking for those deals, and fast fashion came about in the early 90s, I guess, with the advent of Zara being established as a fast fashion store in New York. So it was an early question, and we'll get to questions a little bit later, but an early question is around the stigma related to buying secondhand clothes. And I'd like to, someone else that is part of kind of act the nexus of the youth and also someone who is politically and climate conscious is Miriam Wadsworth, who is a junior at Stanford and also, like I said, a fellow with EOPA. And she's done a lot of work and research around that nexus and the impact of microplastics on the environment. So Miriam, would you please kind of enlighten us on what you found and maybe a little bit of the understanding culturally the impact of fast fashion?
Definitely, yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here. And I think I really started getting interested in the issues involved with fast fashion about 2 years ago, but especially in the past 4 months, as I've had the honor of being an elected officials to Protect America fellow, which has been a great experience. I think part of the reason that I'm so interested in this topic is really because when I look at my life and my background, I have heavily invested in these fast fashion stores. I remember first feeling a pressure to kind of dress a certain way in middle school. And in an effort to stay with the trends, I dragged my mom to Target and bought an enormous amount of very cheap clothing. And it did make me feel better because I felt more aligned with what my peers were wearing. And this trend continued in high school when I would shop at H&M and Forever 21 and other fast fashion retailers. And I remember at one point buying 2 of the exact same t-shirt because I knew I really liked the t-shirt, but I knew that it would deteriorate within a few months. And so I wanted to have a backup. And this is the exact kind of business model that fast fashion works on, is that they know they build their clothing out of very cheap synthetics and oil-based polyesters, and they know that it's going to fall apart within a few months. But this is a great business model because it gets the customer back in the door again and again. And that aligns really well with the current cultural movement or cultural moment that we're in, where trends move incredibly quickly. And because so many people in my generation are on social media, they really feel the impacts of those trends and feel the pressure to stay aligned with them. So once I went to college and I realized that there too, myself and my peers were aligned with this high consumption lifestyle, I started to educate myself more about the issues involved in fast fashion. And I think that although I knew in vague terms kind of the devastation that it lent to the environment and to labor justice, until I really took a deeper dive into the issues, did I kind of was I awoken to my own habits and kind of my ambition to change my habits. So, for example, when I learned just how many thousands of microplastic fibers are shed each time we wash our polyester clothing and how those flood the waterways, or when I learned about the tons of toxic wastewater that is dumped into ponds and streams in Bangladesh and India and Indonesia, Vietnam, or when I learned just to the extent to which the labor practices are really terrible in the sweatshops that are designing these pieces of clothing, that's when I really decided to make a change. So I now am happy to report that I examine the frequency with which I buy my clothing and try to resist trends that I know will disappear within 3 months. And I also am a larger examiner of where I buy my clothing, because there are a lot of thrift stores available and sustainable brands that are up and coming. So I think that's why this event is so important, for example, because I think that education is really what changed my mind. And so I hope to bring that to other people as well. I think it's incumbent upon my generation to educate each other about this issue. And so, yeah, I'm super happy to be here and happy to take any questions.
Well, thank you, Miriam, and thank you, panelists. And questions we do have, we have several that have come in already before we even got to the Q&A section, but that's great. Love to see that. The first question, I'm going to kind of bridge across the three of you. The first question is, how can consumers make sure they're thrifting or buying clothing ethically, sustainably, kind of in terms of sustainable clothing? And I'll start with Félix first on that one.
I think it's very important that consumer and read their labels and also, ask the question where the clothes has been made or coming from. My experience is that even though the clothes was made on 62nd Street between 4th and 5th Avenue in Sunset Park in Brooklyn, New York, some of the material will be sent to China to finish line. But in reality, when you start a product sometime begin here in America, already being against the will of our climate and our environment. So I think the first thing people need to know is how to read the labels to make sure that the clothes that they're buying, is something that it would not impact our environment. Number one, and number two, that is not being made by child labor. And lastly, I would say this too, that I did an investigation, and you probably can Google myself, a program called Hard Copy many years ago, 1996. I did this undercover investigation, and I find out that even in the area in Manhattan, in Chinatown, as well as in Sunset Park area, these manufacturers that they was making the textile, they will be having different kind of labels, and like was made in USA, and in reality was made and finished in China or Tijuana, Mexico, or Honduras or Nicaragua. So they will change the label to make it believe that was made in America. And we work very close with the Attorney General and the Department of Labor to ensure that these practices would not continue to happen here in New York, and became to be a big issue in 1995, 96, 97, and 90 through 98 throughout the country, where I also went as on the cover in Tijuana to work to see how they was making their production and the textile and manufacturing back to America.
That brings up a good, interesting point. And Mayor Harmon, I'd like to throw this one to you in terms of production of clothing and the economic impact, as Félix has mentioned. You know, the presentation of those clothing items that been produced here in America, but the actual labor was done elsewhere. In your comments earlier, you talked about the impact of buying local. With the pandemic, that is one of the things that we've kind of consistently heard is the impact of the economic shutdown on local businesses, so small businesses. Your comments highlighted the need to kind of support your local business, even just in the fashion industry. Can you expound on your take on that and maybe what San Luis Obispo is doing or what you're promoting?
Well, I live in a small non-industrial community, so we don't have a lot of manufacturing here. But I can say that I just this past week went to a place that's called Slocally Made here. And I did actually, I should have pulled it out because it's gorgeous. I bought a black linen dress that was handmade by a local seamstress, and she bought all of the material secondhand. So it's actually also old vintage material. And so it's a perfect example of what I'm talking about when, in terms of there being no reason not to, aim for these types of opportunities. It was made by a local female-owned business, made out of recycled materials, and it's gorgeous. And so that felt exactly right. We don't have a lot of other types of manufacturing here in San Luis Obispo, so I don't have that maybe that challenge that someone in a bigger city with more in manufacturing might have of theoretically some of that manufacturing being local. So we don't have that challenge here. So I focus on true secondhand spots. And then, like, for example, my rose here was made by a local artisan also. And if you, maybe I'll just speak to a little bit of a deeper thing here, if that's okay, is that, just listening to Miriam too, and obviously she's not alone. This is very much a part of the American sort of gestalt, if you will. And it's just something that capitalism absolutely depends on, is that we never feel like we are enough or that we have enough. And it's especially impactful to teenage girls, but it impacts all of us. And that, I think, is actually something that doesn't get talked about enough. But in these kind of conversations, when we're talking about how we use our money and choices that we make, we also, I think, really need to do more of our own work on ourselves to remember that, we are enough. And almost certainly most of us, many of us, at least in the United States, at this moment have enough. And so check in and, make sure that you're really being clear about, do you need this in the first place? Even with thrifting, like I know sometimes because the prices are so low, I try and be mindful even in that space, And the question that was asked in the chat was actually an interesting one, and about the ethics as opposed to the specifics of sustainability. And I think the questioner was getting at, and I might be misinterpreting, but how do I know that when I go into a thrift store, I'm not sort of gobbling up, if you will, things that could have otherwise go to someone more in need? And I don't have the stats in front of me about that system and how it works, but all the thrift stores that I'm aware of in my community are all there supporting people in need of various types, whether it's school children or a hospice thrift store or what have you, or the Goodwill, of course, famous for that, and employing people that also need the work. And I know our local homeless shelter, for example, doesn't even want clothing donations. They have so much. So there's so much used clothes that I'm not hearing, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that there is a lack of availability for folks truly deeply in need to be gifted a lot of clothing. So I think that is also happening. So I think we're talking still about a lot of win-wins in terms of the ethics that someone like me shopping, I hope and presume, is not taking from somebody else more in need in that context.
Thank you for that. With that question in regards to, and you've been a strong proponent of buying local, thrift shops, and forgive my cultural reference here, but with the rising popularity of online resale or consignment, or entities like Rent the Runway and the like, and even the popularity a few years ago of rapper Macklemore's song Thrift Shop. My question to Miriam, as a young adult who's really understands kind of the current culture around fashion, what would it take for your generation to kind of see the shift and appreciate kind of what like Mayor Harmon is showing, that hey, there are gems out there. You know, the old adage, you know, one man's trash is another man's treasure. There are gems out there still that are good designer clothes, but they're just secondhand. What would it take, you think, for your generation to see the value in thrift shopping, if you will?
Yeah, definitely. So I think to start this question, start my answer, is that I'm actually already encouraged by the cultural shift that I am seeing. And I think that a lot of members of my generation are starting to acknowledge the abysmal effects that fast fashion has on the environment and on labor justice issues. And a few years ago, this relates to the question that Mayor Harmon just answered in terms of the controversy of whether thrifting is taking away from those more in need. A couple years ago, maybe 2018, thrifting really did become kind of trendy. It's still a little bit trendy, but it is definitely entering more into the mainstream. And so I'm encouraged by that. I see members of my generation going to thrift stores more frequently, and vintage is kind of in per se. So I think that's another effect of that. I'd also say that I see other changes happening, such as there's a club at my university called Fashion X that hosts quarterly clothing swaps and also focuses on sustainable fashion. So there is that interest there in reusing clothing. I think one thing that really would help this issue to be addressed is trying to convince people that they don't need to follow the trends. And I think I was reading an article that had a good quote that said, half of the fashion industry is fashion, the other half is just marketing. And these fashion retailers have incredible power. There are currently 1 billion active users on Instagram, and more often than not, those people are following at least one influencer who is highly regarded largely because of their fashion sense and the fact that they do follow these trends. So I think that we need to somehow key into the fast moving trends and try to stop or try to slow them down. And maybe one way to do that is by getting through to an influencer to try and promote slow fashion and try to promote thrift stores and sustainable brands and stuff like that. And I'm encouraged because I do see that shift happening. But I do think that as we enter this most vital decade that we have to fight the climate crisis, these things do need to be happening at a faster pace. And so while individual consumer habits are very important, and it's really good to encourage people taking their own agency with these issues, I think it's also very vital that we continue pressing our lawmakers and our representatives to put more regulations on the industry and on the companies, and not necessarily guilt those who are maybe partaking in fast fashion, because if they're low income, maybe that's their only choice, or they could also thrift. But it's also very important to guilt the companies themselves who are embroiled in these environmental and justice injustices, or labor injustices.
Well, with that, and this one for Félix, one of the questions posed is, and for Mayor Harmon as well, the question posed is that, will the pushback or against fast fashion industry hurt so many in the fashion industry that are already out of work due to the current pandemic?
I would say the following, that that as long as that everything get done in a way that that protect the people that are in the manufacturing industry. And I mean, we had to be concerned about all the folks that work in this industry making this clothing. Most of these people happen to be immigrants. 95% of them, some of them probably don't have even paperwork to work in these manufacturing and textiles. And unfortunately, they get abused by the big bosses. And I only can say that because of my own experience of what I face here in New York. I think that accountability is very critical. It's very important. I think that that it's room for everything in our country, but it's not room for injustice in our country. I think that we have to make sure that with people moving in the fat faction, that we be able also to identify and to quantify the kind of materials that get used to make the clothing that is being produced in the textiles. I think it's critical that, and I'm agree with 100% with Miriam. I think that the issue here is that we need to bring awareness, and the awareness. My father used to say is education is important, but you know what? Education is being used so often that we need to begin to change some kind of techniques on how to bring a different perspective to whether it's young generation or old generation. That is not about education, it's about awareness. That way that you'll be able to click that awareness into the head of people. But I think it's very important that we lawmakers and elected officials be very vigilant on not trying to push one group versus the other, but to be vigilant about what are the things that we are capable to do as a legislator, as a policymaker, to ensure that we can have a better environment and a better places for our next generation and the generation to come.
Let's brings up another question. We have a new administration that be moving into in the office in January, and the Biden-Harris administration has mentioned climate change or climate crisis is one of their priorities. As elected officials and citizens who are fighting climate crisis, what are some of the things that you, because climate crisis in general, I mean, it's a huge thing. When you start to take into account social injustice, racial injustice, environmental injustice, there's so many aspects and components of it that it can become overwhelming. But so the question is from both a national standpoint and then a state and local standpoint, what are some of the key things you think could help frame action going forward into the new year?
Did you want me to take that, or
actually, all three.
Go ahead, Mayor.
Okay. First of all, I think it's really important to note that while the Biden administration has at least talked about climate action, that they're nowhere near where we need to be. And, Biden made it clear that he is not interested in pursuing the Green New Deal and all types of things. So want to start by just making sure everybody's clear that we cannot rely on the Biden administration or the Democratic Party largely, or anything like that to get done what needs to be done. It really is up to us to push. I mean, that is, for folks that were frustrated with the choices this year, one of the main reasons, to vote for Biden is that he's movable, right? But he won't move if we don't push him. And so that is our main task, starting January 20th, 21st, is to move him profoundly and swiftly in the direction that we have to go. It's concerning to me that there are fossil fuel oriented folks in his administration already. So just want to be really mindful that that's all happening. So there's a lot of work to be done there. And it's such a tough time. Obviously, people are overwhelmed and exhausted by the public health and economic and schooling crises that most folks are dealing with. And so it really is going to take a unprecedented amount of commitment and tenacity in this historically challenging moment to get up every day and recommit to being part of the solutions to what is the defining issue of our time. You know, I'm tired, I'm overwhelmed. I'm a mayor, you know, I've got a family, I've got all these pieces as well. And I can feel that even in myself. And I can feel the trepidation around communicating about climate action in this sensitive moment when businesses are failing and people are suffering. And nevertheless, it's incumbent upon people like myself in leadership and all of us in general to do it anyway, and do it in a way that is mindful and compassionate for the current struggles that people are under, while we remind folks that ultimately COVID and its impacts pale in comparison to what we will be experiencing with climate crisis. So that is my thought. Those are my thoughts as we start on this new administration. I'm grateful to at least have an opportunity, but it's an opportunity if we take advantage of it.
Miriam or Felix?
Go ahead, Miriam, and then I'll go after you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for this question. And I think kind of the massive implications of what the climate crisis will spell for the rest of my life and those in my generation, and I mean also those on this call as well will be affected, was something that prompted me to join the Sunrise Movement. And I think the intersectional framework through which the Sunrise Movement deals with the climate crisis is something that really drew me to it, especially at the beginning of quarantine and the shutdown, and the similarities between how Corona will touch every aspect of our lives, just as the climate crisis will. So this lens that they look at the climate crisis through, where it's not only an environmental justice issue, but there are issues of racial injustice and labor injustice involved, is something so vital. So I think that when we are fighting the climate crisis, we need to also be fighting for these other issues as well, because it really is something that is going to affect our entire society. And we currently have things that are preventing us from fighting the climate crisis, whether that be like stalemate in Congress or people not getting a living wage. So how can we expect them to focus their energy on fighting the climate crisis if they don't even have enough money to put food on the table or clothe their children right now? So yeah, I think Mayor Harmon's answer was incredibly eloquent, and I really agree with what she was saying. And just, I think the pressure needs to continue. And that's why I'm very excited to be a member of the youth climate movement, and I'm excited to see that the numbers there are just growing. And that's not to discount the work that generations ahead of us have done as well. The older folks are pressuring representatives or in positions of power doing good work as well.
Well, let me just agree with the mayor and Miriam on everything they have said. I would like to add a couple of components. Number one, we have to realize that after November election, 27 states has become to be controlled by the Republican, 23 by Democrat, 63% of the state legislators, Senate, Assembly had been controlled by Republican. 47 has been controlled by Democrat. So I'm saying this as a platform to just fundamentally support what the mayor have saying about the Biden administration. I think the Biden administration, by having individuals that are a part of the problem when it's come to be part of industry that continue to support the fossil fuel. And for me, that I introduced the first divestment bill in New York State. The controller of the state of New York had control of the pension funds of every state, city, and local government employee. So he be able to invest whichever way he want to do it. So I introduced a bill divesting the pension fund money from fossil fuel. That bill, I introduced it 10 years ago. Everyone was thinking about Felix. You always ahead of the curve. You always have legislation that really bring a lot of attention throughout, not just through legislator in New York State, but throughout the country. And I will tell you that last week, finally, And I will remiss if I don't say that the reason why this bill became to be a compromise with the controller, where the controller finally is going to divest that about $650 billion from pension from fossil fuel for the next 4 years, happened because of the amount of young group of individuals throughout the state that began to come together and begin to put pressure, not just to the controller, but to the legislature, and to make sure that we be able to get people to support the bill, because everyone was hiding. A lot of legislators was hiding. They didn't want to support the bill. Second, I would say that that in order for us to have a complete environmental public policy out there, everybody applauding that John Kerry is going to be the person to do it. But John Kerry has been around. Let's be realistic. And for so many centuries. Number one, it's not a bad idea to be around. The bad idea is that he's really going to come and listen to the younger generation and the new Green Deal to make sure that this becomes to be reality. And this is a kind of thing that you need really leaders from the bottom up. And that's the reason I mentioned this control of the states, who control the state, because most of the legislation and good public policy come from people like the mayor, from the bottom up to the state legislator, and trying to push Congress, because if Congress cannot move, we need to have a local government and a state government to move. Lastly, when I introduced the first bill banning plastic back in 1998, people thought that was a joke. People thought, well, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. But then it began to be part of reality when they began to see how many of these plastic bags go into the water, how many of these plastic bags go into places where it's completely was completely unnecessary, unsafe. And I would say that I hope that that Pete, who's been appointed to be Secretary of Transportation, will come with a very strong agenda, because I represent in the area of Sunset Park what they call the BQE, the Brooklyn Queens Expressway. That Brooklyn Queens Expressway bring about 55,000 tons of emission every single day. And if you want to cross from those of you who might know the city, if you want to cross a bridge called Verrazano Bridge from Staten Island to my district in Brooklyn, okay, if you put 10-10 winds by 5:10 in the morning, will tell you already, do not take the BQE because it's already jammed. And then when it's jammed, what do the drivers and the people look for? They're looking for avenues where they can have paths that they can go locally. So then all my avenues become to be completely hijacked by all these vehicles, where in the same line of the BQE, I have 24 schools. And when people say to me, what is the ratio of your school student that are attending your public school? I said, well, only about 40%. They say, how come? I said, because the BQE, with all the emission that is coming out, all these kids have developed asthma and bronchitis. So I hope that the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Transportation, will work close with John Kerry and others to put a very serious agenda to tackle emission into our zone. So with that, I think that it's a lot of high expectation for the Biden's administration. It's a lot of higher expectation for everybody. But the reality is that like the mayor said, it's not going to happen unless we push from the bottom up to make sure that this administration will be accountable and responsible about the issues that need to be addressed in this country, including the issue of immigration reform. So thank you very much for this. Thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to continue to working with you and bringing this issue to the front line.
All right, thank you all. And great summaries, as we said before, and as you all pointed out, the climate crisis is a multitude, or is comprised of a multitude of issues that, and things of practices, policies, and things that contribute to the climate crisis as a whole. Again, the focus on addressing the fast fashion industry, and how it produces microplastics that then end up in our drinking water, and then our oceans and rivers, impacting through the food chain, not only the animals, but us in the end as well. This brings about the point that, yes, there's some positive possibility of moving forward under this new administration, but it is incumbent upon folks like yourselves and others to continue to work and press the administration to make change in those areas and take action to improve our livelihood and quality of life across the board, whether it's the environment, social injustice, as well as immigration. There's a lot of work ahead of us. I'm encouraged by the fact that, as an example, for this year, we had some 150 million Americans actually participate in the electoral process. A lot of those individuals see climate as a #1 priority for them. So it is really good to see leaders such as yourselves out here leading the fight locally, state, and then as activists and nonprofit organizations. And I agree, we must continue to work this from the bottom up. Thank you again for your time. I think that's all we have for time for today. I really appreciate the audience that participated for your great questions. If you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to our organization at protectingamerica.net. And you can find out more about what we're doing and our initiatives there. Again, thank you to our panelists today for your participation, and we'll continue to press this fight forward. Thank you.